Moments ago, President Donald Trump says he has issued his first tariff on Colombia after 2 U.S. deportation flights of undocumented migrants were not allowed to land in Colombia. CNN's Steve Contorno is joining us now live from Florida. Steve, tell us more.
Yeah, Fred, just moments ago, Donald Trump reacting to the news that Colombia had blocked planes carrying undocumented migrants from delivering those individuals back to their home country, and Trump now retaliating with tariffs and threats of more tariffs. He said in a post on social media, quote, "I was just informed that the 2 repatriation flights from the United States with a large number of illegal criminals were not allowed to land in Colombia. This order was given by Colombia's socialist president, Gustavo Petro, who is already very unpopular amongst his people. Petro's denial of these flights has jeopardized the national security and public safety of the United States." So he has then goes on to say that he is taking some action against the Colombian government, including a 25% tariff on goods coming from Colombia immediately, and he's threatening to raise that to up to 50% next week. He also is calling for a travel ban and immediate visa revocations on the Colombian government officials and sanctions on party members and family members that support the Colombian government. So, Fred, this is an early example of how Donald Trump's immigration crackdown is already colliding with his foreign policy and trade proposals, and the first of maybe more to come, Fred.
And then, Steve, how immediate are we talking?
Well, he says in the post that these the 25% tariffs are, quote, an emergency and will go into place immediately. And then in 1 week, the 25% tariff will be raised to 50%, which would be quite a steep climb. Of course, Trump has already proposed sweeping tariffs on many of the U.S.'s trade partners, including a 25% trade tariff on Mexico and Canada that he says might go into effect next month. He is also promising a trade tariff on goods coming from China in recent weeks if they don't negotiate a new deal with the United States. So clearly this has been top of mind for Donald Trump for more than a year. He has said he will use tariffs to get the international players to act in the best interest of the United States and to raise revenue for the country. And we are starting to see him use them as a sort of stick to try to get countries to do the U.S.'s bidding. Fred?
Okay, Steve Contorno, thank you so much. We'll check back with you. So all of these policies are already deterring some migrant groups from continuing their journey to the U.S. as well. CNN correspondent Rafael Romo is joining me now with details on that. Before we get to that, Rafael, I know you've been in contact with a number of people in Colombia, not necessarily in the last few minutes that this just happened, but in general, the kinds of imports that would come from Colombia to the U.S. involves food. Yeah, and the tariffs then being imposed near immediately, according to, Trump's directive here, would mean any kinds of products would cost more to Americans.
That's
from
right.
Colombia.
There's a very long commercial relationship between the two countries. And as far as I can remember, in the last few decades, the relationship has been very good. We're talking about a lot of agricultural products, bananas, a lot of tropical fruits that we consume in the United States that come from Colombia. And so if you start seeing the beginning of a trade war between the two countries, is going to affect not only Colombia as a producer, but also a lot of consumers here in the United States. Now, when you look at this whole issue, you need to look at the numbers. Facts first. During its first week in office, the Trump administration has arrested just over 1,400 undocumented immigrants. At least those are the figures that were publicly released by authorities on January 23rd, 24th, and 25th. During the same period, Fred, an additional 1,243 undocumented migrants already detained in jails around the country have been identified for removal. But U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement data shows the total of removals for last year was over 271,000, which means during President Biden's last year, the average was more than 5,000 deportations per week compared to 2,600 this past week. Regardless of the pace of removals, the rhetoric is already having an impact on would-be immigrants. CNN spoke with some migrants in Guatemala who changed their mind about pursuing their American dream after learning two things, Fred. One, the U.S.-Mexico border was closed for asylum seekers. And two, the application to apply for asylum, known as CBP-1, was shut down in Donald Trump's first day in office. In other words, even if the number of deportations is not higher than before, it seems like some migrants, at least the ones from Central America, are already deciding on their own to go back out of fear that if they reach the U.S. southern border, their effort will not pay off. This is what the migrants told us.
That's what's driving me to go back. Because I can't press forward, not anymore. I have to find a way to return to Honduras. That's what's driving me to go back. Because I can't press forward, not anymore. I have to find a way to return to Honduras.
And in case you didn't catch the last thing the migrant from Honduras said, he told our reporter that he left his home country on January 20th, the very same day of the inauguration. On the other hand, there are at least two countries in the Western Hemisphere that are blocking deportation flights. It is not a surprise that Venezuela is doing so, since its relations with the U.S. have been frosty for years. But earlier today, and this is what we were talking about at the beginning, Fred, Colombian President Gustavo Petro announced he's also blocking the U.S. military flights, saying, quote, "The U.S. cannot treat Colombian migrants as criminals. I deny the entry of American planes carrying Colombian migrants into our territory. The United States must establish a protocol for the dignified treatment of migrants before we receive them." And as we reported Saturday, both Mexico and Guatemala said they will allow U.S. military flights transporting their citizens back home. One minor point that I would like to add, there's already a summit being called by Latin American countries to discuss the issue of migration and what's happening here in the United States.
And this is interesting. All of this is happening really right now. It's unfolding as we are sitting here. So with these U.S. military flights, we saw from the White House pictures, yesterday and the day before that they were departing with migrants. And now our understanding is those that were landing in Colombia or expecting to land in Colombia today, they will have to turn around. They wouldn't even be able to land on soil to even refuel. Any kind of refueling is going to happen in the air, making their way back to the U.S. And then what we don't know is what happens to all of the people who are on these planes, back on U.S. soil, presumably, if that's where they end up, on these U.S. military flights.
And there's a shortage of beds already. It's a problem that the U.S. has had, not right now. It's the same problem that we've seen in previous administrations. And remember, one of the largest groups coming to the U.S. in the last few years was Venezuelans. Well, guess what? The relationship between the two countries is so bad that Venezuela says, no, we're not going to take any flights whatsoever, whether they are our citizens or not. And so that tells you a lot about what's going on here. Also, what's going to happen to the migrants coming from across the world. Migrants coming from China, which the relationship with the U.S. is not the greatest. Migrants from countries like Nepal. How is the U.S. going to transport all of those people on the other side of the world? But again, very, very concerning, the fact that it seems like we're at the beginning of a trade war between Colombia and the U.S., and that may include some other countries in the near future.
Interesting. All right, Rafael, as we learn more, thank you so much. We'll see you again soon.